Okay, so ready to dive into a career that's, well, pretty intense.
Definitely not your average 9 to 5, that's for sure.
We're talking about becoming a victim support officer.
A job where the impact goes way beyond just, clocking in and clocking out.
And thanks to RoleCatcher, we've got some awesome resources to break it all down. You want the inside scoop on what it really takes to support people through some of the toughest moments in their lives.
We're going to get into all that.
The emotional demands, the skills you need, even the potential career paths you could take.
It's about providing a lifeline. And the insights from these RoleCatcher resources, let me tell you, they're eye-opening.
One thing that really struck me was how RoleCatcher emphasizes just how broad this work actually is.
Yeah, it really runs the gamut, doesn't it?
We're not just talking about one specific type of situation. I mean, you could be supporting a victim of a violent crime.
Right, or someone who's experienced years of domestic abuse.
Even something like witnessing a robbery. That can leave a lasting impact.
Absolutely. Trauma comes in so many forms, and a victim support officer needs to be equipped to handle that. All those different experiences, the complexities.
It's not just about offering a listening ear, is it?
It's about understanding the profound impact these events can have on someone's life, their relationships, everything.
In the work environment itself, I was surprised by how much variety there seems to be.
Oh, for sure. One day you might be at a police station, the next you could be at a hospital, a courthouse.
RoleCatcher even mentioned how technology is changing things up.
Online counseling, that's becoming huge.
Which makes sense. Meeting people where they are, literally. Whether it's in person or through a screen.
It's about accessibility, making sure support is available no matter what.
Okay, so let's paint a picture here. What does a day in the life of a victim support officer actually look like?
Well, imagine being that steady presence for someone who's just been through something incredibly traumatic.
Right, like in the immediate aftermath.
You're there for that initial crisis intervention, helping them process those raw emotions.
Because it's got to be overwhelming.
Totally. But then it goes beyond that initial crisis phase.
Yeah, it's not just about picking up the pieces right then and there.
Exactly. You might be helping them navigate the legal system, which can be incredibly daunting.
Especially when they're already feeling so vulnerable.
Absolutely. Or connecting them with essential resources, like healthcare, housing, anything they need to start rebuilding their lives.
It feels like there's a lot of advocacy involved, too.
100%.
Yeah.
RoleCatcher really stressed that. Victim support officers, they're often a victim's primary advocate,
Making sure their voice is heard, their rights are respected.
empowering them to regain that sense of control. Because so much of what makes trauma so difficult is that feeling of powerlessness.
It sounds like this role requires a very particular skill set.
You can't just walk in there without the right tools.
You'd need more than just textbook knowledge to handle these situations. Did RoleCatcher touch on what kind of education or background is helpful in this field?
Oh yeah, they had a whole section on that. And a relevant degree is definitely a good starting point.
Something like psychology, social work.
Exactly, those are the big ones. Counseling, that's another common one. But what I found really interesting was their emphasis on the soft skills.
Because those are harder to teach, aren't they?
They are. You can learn about trauma from a book, but being able to truly listen with empathy, that's something else entirely,
And then there's that whole idea of trauma-informed care.
which is so crucial in this line of work.
I feel like we need a whole other deep dive just on that. But essentially, it's about understanding that someone who's experienced trauma, they might act in ways that seem confusing.
Right, their reactions might not always make sense to the outside world.
But it's a normal response to something that was deeply traumatic.
It is. And approaching them with judgment, that just adds another layer of hurt.
So it's about patience, understanding, meeting them where they are emotionally.
Exactly. And RoleCatcher, they had some powerful quotes from experienced victim support officers, talking about the importance of recognizing vicarious trauma.
Oh, wow. Because you're absorbing other people's pain, essentially.
And that takes a toll. You can't just be a sponge soaking it all up without taking care of yourself.
Which makes me think about the potential for burnout in this field. I mean, dealing with other people's trauma day in and day out, that's got to be heavy stuff. It's like you're carrying that weight with them. Not taking it away, but helping them manage it. Did RoleCatcher have any advice on how to deal with that kind of emotional overload?
They did. A whole section on self-care, which I thought was really smart,
Yeah.
because you can't pour from an empty cup, right?
Exactly.
They talked about things like setting boundaries, which is huge in any helping profession, but especially this one.
Yeah, knowing when to step back, how to protect your own emotional well-being.
Absolutely. And then just, those everyday practices. Mindfulness, exercise, making sure you're getting enough sleep.
All that stuff we know we should be doing, but is so easy to let slip when you're feeling overwhelmed.
Exactly. They even talked about the importance of supervision or peer support, having someone to talk to who really gets it.
Someone who understands the unique challenges of this kind of work.
Yeah, because it's not like you can just go home and vent to your family
Yeah.
about some of the things you hear and see.
Right. It's not your typical water cooler conversation.
Exactly. So having that outlet, that safe space to process those experiences, it's crucial.
It makes you think about the kind of person who's drawn to this line of work in the first place. Like, what are those inherent qualities that make someone a good fit for this kind of role?
Well, empathy, obviously, that's a big one.
Yeah.
Got to have a big heart, be able to put yourself in other people's shoes.
And not just empathize, but actually be able to handle those really heavy emotions without getting totally overwhelmed yourself.
Resilience, that's another one RoleCatcher highlighted. Being able to bounce back from those tough days, those cases that really stay with you.
Because there are going to be a lot of those, I imagine.
Oh, yeah, for sure. It's not always easy, this work. It can be really draining, both emotionally and mentally.
But at the same time, it must be incredibly rewarding, knowing that you're making a real difference in people's lives.
Absolutely. And that sense of purpose, that drive to advocate for those who might not have a voice, that's what keeps a lot of victim support officers going.
It's like a calling, almost.
It is for a lot of people.
Yeah.
But even with all the passion in the world, there are still going to be those days, the hair-pulling moments, the situations where you just don't know what to do.
Every job has those, right? But in this field, the stakes just feel so much higher.
They are. And RoleCatcher actually shared some great advice from a seasoned victim support officer on that. She said something like, "You're not there to fix their problems. You're there to walk beside them as they find their own strength."
Ooh, I like that. It's about empowerment, not rescuing.
Exactly. And that can be tough because you want to swoop in and make it all better, but ultimately, that's not helpful.
They need to find their own way through it.
They do. And your role is to support them in that journey, whatever it looks like.
Which probably involves navigating some pretty tricky situations. I know RoleCatcher also touched on the ethical dilemmas that can pop up in this line of work.
Yeah, they gave this really interesting hypothetical example where a victim's account of what happened, it didn't quite line up with the evidence in the case.
Oh, wow. Talk about a tough spot to be in.
Right. Because your job is to advocate for the victim, but you also have to respect the legal process.
Yeah.
And sometimes those two things, they're not always in sync.
It's not always black and white. There's a lot of gray area.
Exactly. And knowing how to navigate those complexities, that's a big part of what makes a good victim support officer.
It requires a lot of critical thinking, a strong moral compass.
For sure. It's
Yeah.
not a job for the faint of heart.
Okay, so we've talked about the emotional demands, the ethical considerations. What about the actual career trajectory of a victim support officer? Does RoleCatcher offer any insights on how to move up in this field?
They do. And their advice, it was surprisingly practical. They lay out this clear progression, starting with those entry-level roles.
So what does entry level even look like in this field? What are some of the tasks someone might be doing?
Well, you're going to be providing a lot of that basic emotional support, being a listening ear, offering comfort, helping victims understand what's happening. You might also be accompanying them to court appearances, things like that.
Being that steady presence during what can be a really intimidating process.
Exactly. And then as you gain experience, you might specialize.
Like focusing on a specific type of victim support.
Yeah, like working specifically with children who've been through trauma, or maybe families impacted by domestic violence.
Right, because those require different approaches, different sensitivities.
Absolutely. And RoleCatcher, they actually list out different certifications and advanced degrees, things that can help you move into those more specialized roles.
Oh, yeah, they had a whole section on that.
Yeah, it was great.
Yeah.
Like getting a master's in social work, that opens a lot of doors. Or becoming a certified trauma-informed care provider.
It's good to know there are actual steps you can take, concrete things you can do to build your expertise.
And it's not just about, checking boxes on a resume. It's about continuously learning, growing as a professional.
Staying up to date on the latest research.
Exactly. Attending conferences, connecting with other professionals. This field, it's constantly evolving. New approaches, new challenges.
So someone who's naturally curious, eager to learn, they'd probably thrive in this kind of environment.
100%.
Yeah.
You got to be adaptable, always willing to expand your knowledge base.
Okay, so for someone who's thinking, this sounds amazing, but is there even a need for victim support officers? Like, what's the job market actually look like?
That's a great question. And the good news is, RoleCatcher, they paint a pretty optimistic picture.
Really?
Yeah, all signs point to this being a growing field, and honestly, it makes sense when you think about it.
Because as the stigma around things like domestic violence and sexual assault starts to fade, more and more people are coming forward.
Exactly. And that means there's a greater need for specialized support, people who are trained to handle these incredibly sensitive situations.
Which is where victim support officers come in. They're literally on the front lines of this issue.
They are. They're the ones providing that critical support during those really vulnerable moments, helping people navigate the system, reclaim their lives.
It's such important work. And speaking of resources, one thing that really impressed me about RoleCatcher was their Get Discovered feature. It's like having a digital matchmaker for your career, right?
It's brilliant. I mean, think about it. Instead of you having to send out a million resumes, hoping to get noticed.
Praying for a response.
Exactly. With this, employers can actually search the platform for potential candidates.
Based on their skills, their experience, everything.
Right. So it takes some of the pressure off the job seeker.
It's like flipping the script. Instead of you chasing after opportunities, the opportunities come to you.
Exactly. Which is huge in a field like this, where you're already dealing with so much emotionally. It's like, hey, we see your value, we recognize your passion.
And it's not just about finding any job. It's about finding the right fit.
100%.
Yeah.
A place where you can really thrive, make a difference.
Okay, so we've covered so much ground here. We've talked about the day-to-day realities of being a victim support officer, the emotional toll it can take, the incredible rewards. But at the end of the day, it all comes back to that initial spark, that desire to dedicate your career to supporting others. What would you say to someone listening who feels that pull, that calling towards this line of work, but maybe they're a little intimidated by the weight of it all?
I get it. It's a big responsibility. But honestly, if you're feeling that pull, lean into it. That compassion you have, that desire to make a difference, that's the very foundation of being a successful victim support officer.
It's about trusting that instinct that's telling you, this is where I'm supposed to be.
Exactly. And don't get too caught up in the what ifs, like what if it's too hard? Or what if I'm not cut out for this?
Because those doubts, they're going to creep in no matter what.
Oh, they totally will. But don't let them paralyze you. RoleCatcher, they actually had this whole section on other career paths, ones that share similar skill sets to a victim support officer.
Oh, that's interesting. So even if someone's listening and they're like, this sounds incredible, but maybe I need to explore a bit more.
Exactly. There are these branching paths you could look into.
What were some of the examples they gave?
Let's see. One that stood out was working as a mediator.
Oh, interesting. Like in community disputes.
Yeah, exactly. Or even something like a career counselor.
Yeah.
Helping people navigate those big job transitions,
Right, because there's a lot of overlap there. The empathy, the active listening, the ability to handle those tough conversations.
For sure. And it just goes to show the skills you develop in a role like this, they're transferable. They're valuable in so many different settings.
It's like when one door closes, another one opens. Or maybe in this case, it's more like when one path calls to you, be open to exploring the entire forest.
I love that. And speaking of exploring, one thing that really resonated with me from RoleCatcher was their focus on, the power of community, connecting with other people in this field.
Because even though the work itself is about supporting others, it doesn't mean you have to go it alone.
Exactly. They had a whole thing on finding mentors, joining those professional organizations, even just going to workshops, conferences, stuff like that.
Because just being around other people who get it, who understand the unique challenges and rewards of this line of work.
It's huge. It's like having a built-in support system. People you can share best practices with, vent to when you're having a tough day,
Grateful to celebrate those wins with, because there are definitely wins to be celebrated in this field.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Even small victories, they deserve to be acknowledged.
Yeah.
Because this work, it's heavy, it's important, and those wins, they matter.
They do. Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive into the world of a victim support officer, what's the one thing you want our listeners to walk away with? That nugget of wisdom that they can carry with them, whether they decide to pursue this path or not?
For me, it all comes down to this. The work of a victim support officer, it's not for everyone. It takes a special kind of person to do this day in and day out.
Someone with a lot of empathy, a lot of resilience.
Exactly. But for those who are called to it, the impact you can have, it's immeasurable. You have the potential to truly change people's lives.
To walk alongside them during their darkest moments and help them find their way back to the light.
Beautifully said. And if that's a calling you feel in your heart, don't ignore it. Explore it. Learn everything you can and know that you have the potential to make a real difference in this world.
So well said. And for anyone listening who's feeling that spark, that desire to serve and support, remember, there are resources out there like RoleCatcher that can help guide you on that journey. So until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep into the things that matter most to you.